Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sierra McNeely, Director of Digital Marketing for ControlPanelGRC, and I will be moderating today's live session. We appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy schedule to learn how you too can become audit confident. We will be starting the webinar shortly, but first, a few housekeeping notes. Only our presenters' phones are live. Your phone has been muted to block any background noise, and our presenters will be answering questions throughout today's session. If you have any questions, please type it into the question and answer function in your webinar sidebar. Today I'd like to introduce Michael Rasmussen. He is the GRC pundit for 2020, GRC 2020. We also have John Sigmund, Director of IT for Carlisle Construction, and Scott Gulick, VP of Compliance and Security Services for Symmetry Control Panel GRC. Michael, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here today with everybody to spend this next virtual hour. And what I say is a critical and important topic, and that's really how do we take GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance, and achieve value through automation. So one of the things that is really bearing down upon organizations is the fact that organizations are very dynamic. They're constantly changing. We have a range of legal and regulatory change, changing laws, rules, regulations, enforcement actions, administrative decisions, notices of proposed rulemaking, and more. The regulation itself or the law doesn't have to change, but the requirements change. You think of something like Sarbanes-Oxley, passed now 14 years ago. But the law itself, it hasn't changed, but a lot of the enforcement and scrutiny that you get from auditors, like in the last couple of years, there's been greater PCAOB scrutiny and oversight of the use of things like spreadsheets and things within accounting purposes and for internal controls and things. And so the things evolve and change and shift. We have a lot of internal business risk change. We have changing business strategy and processes, and that impacts the state of our controls. We have changing IT systems and employees. Those new employees that come in, what type of access are they given to systems? Do they have segregation of duty issues? Those that changed roles within the organization. They might have been employees for the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. But every time they move and change roles, they're given more and more access, and their old access isn't removed, causing significant inherited rights issues and things like that. How do we manage that? How do we keep abreast of changing employees and third-party relationships? We live in a day and age in which what the term insider, go back 20 years ago, the term insider was pretty much a synonym for an employee. Not so anymore. Half of our insiders and those that have access to our ERP and business systems oftentimes are contractors, temporary workers, outsourcers, service providers. And how do we manage those? And those businesses are changing just as much as our business is changing. And how do we deal with things during mergers and acquisitions and the integration of different ERP systems, and SAP systems and things, and consolidation of those during the mergers and acquisitions, and the rights and issues there as well. Lots of challenges that are happening within organizations to trying to manage GRC across this complex, dynamic business environment that a lot of organizations are struggling with. Next slide, please. So when we think about this, a lot of organizations are managing internal controls and spreadsheets with a lot of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And this is what I call the inevitability of failure. It's not sustainable. It's not going to work. For internal control self-assessments, risk and control self-assessments, we're sending out documents, spreadsheets, and emails, sending them out to a variety of individuals. We're trying to get things back and report on them. I had one organization tell me that 80% of their GRC staff time, so staff time for internal controls, risk, audit, compliance, 80% of their staff time became nothing more than document reconcilers, trying to go through and shift and all the document spreadsheets and emails out there that are being managed in the organization. And it was excessive, and the organization couldn't keep up anymore. And it was the inevitability of failure. They needed to shift that model, spin it on its head, so that really only 80% of only 20% of the time would be spent on that type of activity. So organizations are struggling trying to keep up with a mountain of documents, spreadsheets, emails, which is what I call, battling the Hydra, as you can see in this example here. But when we deal with spreadsheets, documents, and emails for internal control purposes, things are bound to go wrong. Beyond the excessive amount of time trying to manage these documents and keep things current, they are prone to errors. Things get lost and slips through the cracks, and we only get a partial view of internal controls. Next slide, please. And so the organizations I'm talking to tell me that they have an inability to gain a clear view of operational status of controls. And a lot of times they're only doing a small slice and segment of those controls. There's a high cost of consolidating control information. There's difficulty maintaining accurate control information. There's a failure to trend across assessment periods and understand, how we're doing from one reporting period to the next period on internal controls. There's redundant approaches that limit correlation, comparison, and integration of controls. An overall lack of agility to respond to constantly changing, risks, regulations, laws, and changing business itself, and changing and shifting employees and their access controls and segregation of duties and inherited rights issues. A lot of things. At the end of the day, internal control personnel, end up being what you have here on the right, balancing on a high wire on a bike while you're juggling. That seems probably like most of your guys' jobs, those that are on the line right now watching this webinar. That's what I constantly see within organizations in my research, is that they're struggling to try to keep up and keep everything going, and they don't have the right tools to make GRC efficient, effective, and agile. I'll talk more about that in a second. Next slide, please. So when we look at GRC, the goal is to really be able to integrate GRC across a lot of systems and processes. Within GRC technologies, governance, risk management, and compliance technologies, for the past, 14 years, I've been talking about the GRC market since February 2002 when I was at Forrester. I was the first to define and label a market and call it GRC. So I've been called the father of GRC at times. For over the past decade, there's been a lot of focus on the workflow, task management, content management piece of GRC. But more and more, I'm seeing organizations say, hey, we need to move beyond this. We need greater efficiency and value in our organization. Therefore, we need to operationalize GRC. We need to integrate GRC into the fabric of our business processes and our ERP systems. We need complete contextual awareness of GRC so that it's really a central nervous system that captures all the different signals that can be found in processes and transactions and other data that is in context of changing risks and regulations, and be able to report more holistically on that. GRC itself needs to be integrated across business systems, ERP systems, so that we have holistic awareness of risk and controls in the context of the business's operations and its specific transactions. We need to be able to monitor risk and compliance and understand the course of business operations and the changing dynamics of risks and the status of internal controls to address those risks and remain compliant. That's operationalizing GRC. And so the next wave of GRC maturity really and value from that perspective is about automation. How can we automate and provide greater insight and visibility to what's going on in the business? Next slide, please. So one key area of automation that I cover in my research is the area of access controls, along with a range of other automated controls. You've got different end-user computing controls, a variety of process controls, and fraud analytics. But access controls is one of the areas I see a lot of organizations specifically focusing on, because you can achieve a lot of value quickly. A lot of value in reducing the amount of time and effort of manual reconciliation of access controls and inherited rights issues and segregation of duty issues. Doing that manually is just a significant burden in time, and you usually only cover a small sample set of the user population, where automation can give you full visibility into all the users and more complete and accurate understanding of what's going on, of the who, what, how, when, where, and why people have access. And so access controls, such as access controls within SAP systems, is a specific area that I see a lot of organizations aiming to try to achieve a lot of value, efficiency value, effectiveness of value, and agility value to make the organization more streamlined, less costly in compliance, and in mitigating risk. Next slide, please. So we have the manual process approach, in which a couple slides ago I had the Hydra slide with the inevitability of failure. That's how a lot of organizations are approaching access controls and segregation of duties, inherited rights issues within their ERP environments. This approach is what it's very much like the graphic on the left, which I call Dante's Inferno. It's this fractured mess of wasted resources, unnecessary complexity, high cost, poor integration, only a lack and limited visibility into the bigger picture of things. So at the end of the day, it's not effective, it's not efficient, and it's certainly not agile. Surprisingly, though, many, if not most organizations, still use manual processes and documents to manage access control risks in their organization. And they primarily do this on the spreadsheets, word processing documents, and emails, and route those around and have people validate and check things, and only get a small random sampling slice of what's going on in the environment instead of a full, complete picture. So these approaches are not efficient, and they're not effective, and they're not agile. It slows the business down, and it introduces greater exposure to risk and non-compliance because it's impossible to keep up with the changing business environment, the changing employees, the changing business and transactions and technologies, and even changing compliance requirements. Next slide, please. So what organizations need is they need an architecture, a GRC information and technology architecture that can take in the variety of different types of GRC data and transactions, and including configuration information and access information, and be able to map these together to provide context, analyze the relationships. This employee has these types of roles and needs this type of access, but has this amount greater access, and there's conflicts and segregation of duty issues. Therefore, we need to create action items of how to resolve those segregation of duties or inherited rights issues. Sometimes we have to live with segregation of duty issues, so those action items are more closely monitoring those accounts where we have SOD conflicts because the business needs those to operate the way it's operating and with the resources it has. And so we need those ongoing action items to be able to monitor where we do have SOD risks and they are going to live in the organization for a period of time, as well as the action items to mitigate SOD risks and inherited rights issues and so forth. But we need that, information and technology architecture to be able to monitor all this access risks and SOD conflicts, inherited rights issues, and everything else, provide analysis and context to be able to create those action items so that we can remain compliant to understand the big picture of the organization. Next slide, please. So when we automate controls, like access controls with segregation of duties, it achieves three core benefits from my perspective. First one, it quickly identifies the data trends, patterns, and outliers. What's going on in the organization? Where are the conflicts happening? And how significant are they, and what can we do about it? Then it helps us easily communicate those discoveries with stakeholders, where we can quickly route and automate the tasks and remediation efforts to remove those conflicts and issues that we discover. We might route it to a business owner and make them become aware of it and say, yes, we need to remove that access, that is a conflict and issue. And ultimately, at the end of the day, reduce audit findings and get clear and more accurate audit reports, and maintain a status of compliance, and not just on a sampling of users, but on a complete picture of all of our users and their access. And number three, it allows us to intuitively follow through with actions, so that when there are remediation efforts, we can track them to make sure that they get done, and we're not just sending off emails that says do this, and it gets accidentally deleted and filed away, and things are getting deleted all the time now in emails. And I get frustrated because on my smartphone, I often accidentally delete an email and have to go back in the trash and undelete it because I just swiped the wrong thing on that small screen when I'm, walking along on my way to another meeting or something. So just sending things in emails and things to say, hey, make sure this is remediated and completed isn't enough anymore. We need complete task management to make sure things are done and followed through intuitively. But automation should help us identify where we have conflicts and issues, understand what our business strategy is, and sometimes our strategy means that we have to have some conflicts and SOD risks in areas. How do we monitor those more specifically? How do we measure the overall risk and exposure, and measure the remediation efforts. Align different groups together so that not only is internal control and finance working with this, but audit can leverage the use of automated controls to streamline internal audit processes, but also even external audit has less to look at and can rely more on what we're using technology for, and streamline external audit fees and costs. And overall improve our organization's internal controls so that they are not only designed properly, but they're operating effectively in the organization. Next slide, please. Which brings me to the point of value. You know, when I measure GRC value, I measure it around three angles: the efficiency angle, the effectiveness angle, and the agility angle. The efficiency angle is about the financial capital and the human capital savings. So when we look at things like access controls and segregation of duties, you know, how can we validate and show dollars saved and time saved? You know, before it costs us this much money and time to look at access controls from this perspective, and maybe we're only sampling 5% of the users or 10% of the users in their access right, and our external audit fees were thus. Now, after we implemented automated controls, we now get, you know, it cost us this. You know, before it might have cost us, you know, 160 man hours or FTEs to be able to do something. Now down to, you know, 10 hours because of the automation, and a lot less manual reconciliation and review because of that automation. Our external audit fees used to be $500,000. Now they're down to $300,000 because the external auditors are relying more on the automated controls and the enforcement of that in the environment to report through that. I've seen that time and time again. That's the efficiency value. Then you have the effectiveness value. We have the right controls defined, but then there are the operating effectiveness. And part of that effectiveness is the completeness. You know, before we were only able to sample 5 to 10% of the user population. Maybe if you're really good, 25%. Now we are getting 100% sampling of the organization's users and access right, full visibility. Nothing's really slipping through the cracks. We know what's going on, what roles are defined, what conflicts are out there, what's being remediated, and we have that full picture of access controls and segregation of duties, inherited rights, and so forth. And then the third angle of value is the agility value. You know, how responsive can we be to change? You know, we looked at the control environment, you know, 6 months ago, but all of a sudden we have had a lot of users come in and people change roles. We're hiring a lot of employees and growing, and we have a lot of conflicts and things now. And so how do we stay on top of change? You know, before in the manual processes, you know, we just probably did it on some type of annual basis of user access reviews in context with SOX and attestations. But now we can stay on top of it as those changes are made. So we're agile as the business change and new people are set up in the systems, other people are moving areas and have inherited rights issues, creating more FTD conflicts and things. As we have these changes made, we're on top of the controls and the context of those changes when they're made. And when we do have issues, the automation is quick to notify those issues and contain them so that they don't grow to be bigger issues. That's the agility value. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn this back over to our host and also, you know, Carlisle, to be able to discuss how they've achieved some of these values and that I've brought forth here.
Thank you, Michael. I would now like to introduce John Sigmund, Director of IT at Carlisle Construction Materials. The floor is yours, John.
Thanks, Ciara. To give you a little background on me, I've been the Director of IT at Carlisle Construction Materials since 2012. We manufacture roofing, insulation, and waterproofing for the commercial construction industry. Our annual revenues are about $2 billion, and we have 2,400 employees at 29 plants in North America and in Europe. Our parent company is Carlisle Companies Incorporated, and they have about 11,000 employees and an annual revenue of about $3.5 billion. If you want to go to the next slide. So the reason I'm here today is to talk to you a little bit about our journey with audit compliance and remediation at CCM. Carlisle Companies is a publicly traded company, so we do have very strict Sarbanes-Oxley requirements. When I started with CCM, we were consistently receiving poor audit results, both from our internal auditors and from our external auditors. Every time we would have an audit, we would find additional people that would have separation of duties risks. The number of findings was increasing every year, In our SAP system, we had over 3,000 roles, and we only had about 700 users in that system. So it was really getting out of control on the security side. That made it even more difficult to make changes or to analyze results for those changes. Looking back on some of the slides that Michael talked about, the slide that really hit home for me was the one where he said, "And we hope nothing fails." That's the state that we were in back in 2012, is every time the auditors would come in, we knew that there was going to be a new finding because our security and our SAP security was not in the condition that it should be. So we tried to remediate those findings manually. It was very time consuming. The issue was it repeatedly would not help improve our results. Pulling the data out of our systems for annual reviews and audits was also very time consuming. We had several people that would work on and off over a period of several months, extracting roles and access, trying to compile the T codes and the security and who owned those roles and the spreadsheets. And then they would email out those roles to managers for approval for who should have access, is this the right access, and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a very, very manual process for us, and it was wrought with errors. Once the auditors would come on site, they had an SOD tool that they would run. We would have to extract some data out for them. They would go off site, analyze the results, and they would come back and give us the results of our separation of duties. We did try purchasing another separation of duties tool, and we worked with our auditors to try to make some corrections, but what we found is every time we tried to make changes, it really wasn't fixing the SOD issues, and would sometimes even make it worse. To make matters worse than that, every time we worked with our auditors to do a separation of duty analysis, there was a $4,000 charge for them to run the tool, do the analysis, and give us the feedback. So it was very difficult, time-consuming, and costly to even find out if any of our changes were making improvements. So we really knew that we had to change something, we had to do something else. So that's when we started searching for some new SAP solutions. And you can go on to the next slide. So we researched and benchmarked several tools. I won't mention the specific tools here, but I will say what we were really looking for is we not only wanted to work with a tool that was going to help automate our compliance and documentation and get us paperless, but we were also looking for a redesign of our security model because our security model also was not in the best shape. So that's when we came across the Symmetry tool. We've used Symmetry in the past for some basis work, and we had just engaged them for helping us outsource some of our security work. So as part of that, when we were talking to them, they offered to do a security assessment. So for that, they gave us a tool to extract some data out of our systems. They went back, they imported that data into a test system at their site, and very quickly they were able to come back to us, and as part of that assessment, they gave us, a top 10 list of users that had the most SOD risks in our system. They gave us information about some security changes that we should be making immediately because there were some security holes that really need to be fixed. And they also came in and gave a in-depth demonstration of some of the features of their tool set and what their tool set could do to help us out here. So here I'd like to stop for just a minute and ask Scott Gulick if he can step in and just give us a quick overview of what some of the tools are that are available through Symmetry's ControlPanelGRC.
Thanks, John. Again, my name is Scott Gulick. I'm the Vice President of Security and Controls at Symmetry Corporation, and I'm responsible for the development and support teams for ControlPanelGRC. ControlPanelGRC is essentially 4 different integrated suites, and Carlisle had invested in 3 of them in total. So our access controls is the primary area that was the focus of this case study, where we're able to check for segregation of duty risks, access to critical transactions, who has access to sensitive authorizations, and those were a lot of the things that the auditors at Carlisle were looking through and trying to figure out why did people have this access at the time. When we did that assessment, we were able to show them here's where you do have the risks, prioritize some of the easy ones, some of the quick hitters. And this accelerated remediation toolkit really came out of the requirements that Carlisle had to try to get clean as quickly as possible. So we are evaluating transaction usage to help group access together and come up with a proposed security design. We were using our emergency access management so that we could give people their old security back after the security redesign had gone live. And we used some tools to do automated testing of the new roles as well as automatic derivation of the organizational level specific roles. So some of the other areas, the basis control suite's another component that John and his team have been using, and then we also have process controls and our security accelerators. They're really just things to help out and make life a little bit easier for the security folks.
Thanks, Scott. So we evaluated the tool set and went through the demonstration in late 2014, and then we started our implementation in 2015. The first tool that we started with, or the first tools, as Scott mentioned, we not only bought the access control suite, but we also worked with some of the basis controls and the process controls. So we purchased the transport manager tool and implemented that along with the separation of duties risk analyzer, usage analyzer tool for tracking what transactions people are actually using in the system, and then also the emergency access tools. So once we purchased these first 4 items were implemented very quickly. We went 100% paperless with our transports during the first week of implementation. So this was one of our, we really saw this as a big win for us. So in the past, we kept all of our transports on paper, and we would sign a document, keep all the documentation with it, staple it together, and then route it around for approval, and our basis team would transport it. So every year we would have a stack of paperwork for transports that was between 3 and 4 feet tall. And then when auditors would come in, we would have it sorted by month and date, but we would have to go through that stack of paper, pull out the sample set that they were looking for, whether it be 25 or 50 transports, unstaple those, fax them. So just that alone was a huge win for us. We went to 100% paperless, had all of our transports, all the documentation, all of the supporting evidence for every transport inside the ControlPanelGRC tool, and everything was electronic so we can get to it instantly. We also implemented the emergency access tool in that first week, and that was used for granting elevated access for things like SAP support, or when we had to do something in IT where we needed elevated access or we needed to open the system. The control panel tool and the emergency access manager would allow us to approve that, document any changes that were made while we had that elevated access, and then route that audit log for approval, and then keep all the audit logs in the system. So the other tool that we also implemented during this first week was the risk analyzer. So we were immediately during this first week able to load up Symmetry's default rulebook that they deliver with the product, and we were able to analyze our risks in real time. So in the past, we could get a audit result from our auditors by paying them $4,000. They would go away for a week or two and then come back with results, and we still wouldn't have a good idea of what was going on. So with this tool, we could analyze all of our security access for all of our users, and the tool ran in about 30 seconds. And we could do this in real time anytime we wanted. We did spend some time with the risk analyzer after that, working with our external auditors. We asked them to look at and compare their tool to the tool that we were using for Symmetry. And we worked with them to verify that the access that we were seeing was the same that they were seeing. And then they also, in order to certify that we could use that instead of their tool for our external audits, they verified that there was an audit system so that they could tell if any rulebook changes were made, that they would be able to see that in reports, and that they would be able to get reports of any changes that we were making to the actual rulebooks or anything like that. So that allowed our external auditors to then trust the Symmetry tool for all of our separation of duties analysis. So that was a big win for us as well.
Excellent. So, John, we do have a question that I'm just going to interject here, and I'll address it too. The question is, what is exactly is the accelerated remediation toolkit? Is it hands-on support or a group of tools or something else? The accelerated remediation toolkit is basically functionality that we built in to our access control suite and our security acceleration suite. And we did this to try to help companies that were looking to do security redesigns quicker. There is a methodology that goes with this, but there's not a requirement to use Symmetry or Symmetry Consulting services to actually execute that methodology. So this is functionality, and this is essentially what John's kind of describing, what they had used at CCM to get through this this redesign quickly.
Yeah, so to tie into that, Scott, so that stuff I just talked about was all done during the first week. So we got some big wins the first week, and then we engaged Symmetry to do the remediated or the remediation for us, the accelerated remediation. And so basically what happened during that is Symmetry extracted our usage information. They worked with us to develop a security model based on a user function structure. So in the past, everything was based on specific transactions, and we ended up with 3,000 roles applied to only 700 people. Symmetry came in with the new methodology, and what we ended up with is we would have like a role for our customer service team, we would have a role for our shipping execution team, we would have a role for our production reporting team, and so on. And then the roles were designed around what people actually used in the system and what they actually did in the system. So whereas in the past, by default, if somebody was in production, they would have access to anything to do with production reporting. They would get access to all those transactions, whether they used them or not. Part of Symmetry's methodologies, they come in and they actually analyze what all the users that you're grouping together in that area, what transactions have they used, what security access are they using, and then they help you define and develop the roles that's going to be required for that specific functionality. So by defining those roles around what people actually did as opposed to what they might need access to, we were able to significantly reduce the number of separation of duty risks that we had for those employees. And then during the process as well, Symmetry provides you with information on a regular basis. So as they're developing these roles and they're going through the transactions that are needed in each one, they give you a risk summary for each of these roles that you're developing. They'll tell you what the risks are for that role, what transactions are causing those risks. So that gives you the opportunity to go back to your user base and to, if there's, say, one transaction that's causing an entire group from an area to have a risk, you can go back to that manager of that group and say, do you really need this transaction, or can we move this transaction, say, into customer service, because this is really their role anyway. So it helps you to further reduce those SOD risks. So as part of this whole project, we ended up with about 70 primary roles and 350 total roles once we derived roles for specific plants or sales organizations. So those 70 primary roles were the function that somebody did, say it's customer service or shipping, and then we would apply like a plant number or a sales org number to set those 70 primary roles to separate the security out further. So we were really working with about 70 core roles that we had, whereas in the past we had 3,000. Talking about some of the tools that we used during this process, I know Scott said you didn't have to use the Symmetry tools. We did use a number of the Symmetry tools. We purchased those. And
just to clarify, so you didn't have to use the Symmetry services. The control panel solution is definitely all the accelerated remediation toolkits.
Yeah, sorry. We did use the Symmetry tools for our remediation process as well. So one of the big tools that was a big deal for us was the Emergency Access Manager. So what this tool did for us was we were able to move very quickly with our SAP security redesign because we had gotten some experience with the Emergency Access Manager in that first week with being able to elevate access for our IT people to get emergency access to the system. During the redesign, what that tool does for you is it allows you, once you turn on your new roles, the emergency access transaction can actually be given to your end users, and it can be used to give them the specific security roles that they had before the implementation. So what we did is, the tool's very easy to use. We basically just sent out an email with the transaction to call for the tool. They would call the transaction. They would type in a description if they were having an access problem with the new roles, and that tool would immediately restore their old access, and so they could continue working. They would have no work stoppages because of the new roles being implemented. and Symmetry would also be notified immediately. Anytime that an end user used that tool, they'd be notified of a description of what the transaction was that they needed to run. They would also get information about the security that the last security error that person had, and then during the remediation project, they would have all hands on deck, and most of those issues were resolved either same day or within 24 hours. So that allowed us to actually do our security remediation project in about 4 months total for all of our users. And we were able to turn it on with confidence and without causing any user interruption, because we had that emergency access tool and because it was so easy to use. So we had very good end user feedback. During implementation, there's also several other tools used as part of the project. They have a test automation tool that gives you a requirement list for each role for what transactions need to be tested, and a tool for automatically creating test user IDs, assigning those transactions to them, and then having end users walk through a test with those transactions, and the tool monitors if the transactions are working, and the users can report any issues that they have. So all of that automation is part of the tool as well, and it's all part of the logging that's done in the tool. So that's an overview of that accelerated remediation project that we went through at CCM. Another item I wanted to mention is one of the items that came out as part of our accelerated remediation project was our IT users were actually some of our worst offenders for the having separation of duties or excessive access in SAP. A lot of times with IT, the IT people are saying, well, I need access to be able to create orders or change pricing because I have to be able to help my end users. And in our case, they were our worst offenders. So Symmetry also had an out-of-the-box set of IT roles and rules that we also implemented at the same time. And that was a very quick implementation. The out-of-the-box rule set had a set of basis rules. And then for your IT group, they actually have a rule set that will give your IT users complete read access to everything, including getting into the IMG and SPRO and being able to see the configuration in production, but not being able to change anything. So when they could get into config, they couldn't change things in config, but they could see everything that they needed. They could get into sales orders, they could get into shipments and all of that and run all the transactions, but they couldn't change anything. And we were actually able, from the time of purchase till the time of implementation, took us about a week. And we were able to turn that on immediately. And it took our IT group, which was our worst group for access, and immediately eliminated 100% of all the separations of duty risk that they had by giving them read-only access in production. And then the emergency access tool was the key to making that work. I'm sure there's several people out there going, my IT guys would never go for that. And we thought the same thing here, but as we talked through the process, we also rolled out that emergency access manager tool. So anytime that anyone in IT needed to make a change or help a customer or go in and change a sales order, they pulled up the emergency access manager tool. They got access to make their changes in real time. The emergency access manager tool actually logs and documents and keeps track of any changes that are made by the person that called the emergency access. And then once they close that out, it gets sent over to a manager for approval and review. So we have a complete audit log of anytime anyone in IT needs to go into the system and make a change or help a user out, we can see everything that they were done, and it gets approved every time by the manager. And we use that process multiple times per day here at CCM. The other part of the tool was annual user access reviews. So as part of our Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, our auditors were requiring us to do annual user access reviews. In the past, that process involved extracting all of our security roles, all 3,000 of them, out of the system, compiling those into Excel spreadsheets, and sending out thousands of pages of emails for managers to review and approve, like who had access and transactions. As you can imagine, there was a lot of follow-up required. There was a lot of times that data wasn't returned. People didn't understand what they were looking at. So when we implemented the control panel tool for the automated annual user access reviews, The way the process works now is for these 70 primary roles or the 350 derived roles that we have, there's an owner assigned to each one. When we kick off the automated annual user access review, there's a workflow that gets sent to each person that owns a role. They can see right inside of SAP, inside of the control panel tool, they can see all the transactions that are part of the role. They can see all the users that have access to those transactions, and they can, right inside of the tool, give comments, ask for transactions or users to be removed from those roles if they're no longer appropriate, and then they can approve those roles right inside the system. If there are changes, those changes are sent to an IT manager for approval. If IT approves them, they're routed directly over to Symmetry, because Symmetry is also now doing our basis security work for us. And the changes are implemented very quickly in the system, again, usually within 24 hours, and everything's automated and documented and approved right inside of SAP. No more paperwork or emails or following up on people not doing things.
And John, with some of that in mind, could you go into some of the benefits, some of the short-term and long-term benefits?
Yeah, so actually I can go to the next slide. I went really long on that slide, sorry. So for our benefits, on the short-term side, we saw an immediate reduction in separation of duties risk. Our new roles for IT had no risk at all. The new end-user roles were specifically based on the transactions used in the past. So this helped us to reduce the total number of risks in the system. If they hadn't used it, they weren't given access to it in the new roles. It was also very quick. We did it in 4 months. The end-user feedback was very positive. Overall, we were able to reduce our time and dollar commitment for audits and mitigating controls. Everything was much simpler, and the mitigating controls were now all stored electronically inside of SAP. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as a summary, we went from about 3,000 roles down to our 70 primary or 350 derived roles. Almost all of our mitigating controls are now stored in SAP. We no longer have to manually extract all the security information for all of our audits and annual access reviews. Manual testing was reduced by about 85%. We do still have some manual testing that we do, but by the most part, it's down to a very small amount. On the cost side, we were actually able to eliminate the use of one of our external auditors. So our corporate internal audit team, they used to use PwC for our separation of duties and all of our IT general controls testing. As part of this project, we worked closely with our internal audit group. We showed them the Symmetry tools as we were implementing it, and we trained them on how to use it. And so now, whereas in the past, we used to have to spend a lot of time for the managers and employees in IT to extract data out, go through paperwork. Our internal audit team now actually logs into our SAP system. They use the Symmetry control panel tool, and they saved enough time with that they no longer need the external consultants that were being used by our internal audit group. So that was we'd have 2 PwC auditors on site for 4 weeks, pulling data, looking through test cases, working with us on pulling data out, and they've completely eliminated those 2 auditors for a 4-week period, and the internal audit team does all of that basic audit work and testing and everything by themselves. We do still continue to use E&Y for our external audit team, so we didn't eliminate that, but E&Y uses the information that's gathered by our internal audit team for anything to do with IT general controls and separation of duties, and E&Y is primarily doing our financial financial systems auditing now. And then as part of this, we were also able to reposition that we used to have a full-time security person on our staff. We outsourced our security to Symmetry. They now handle making all of our security changes for us for much less than the cost of a full person. And we were able to reposition that security person to take on other non-security roles in IT. So I'd say overall, our biggest saving was reduced time. The IT general controls audits are much easier than they were in the past. Our auditors come in, they extract their own evidence. The IT and business time for audits was significantly reduced over what we were seeing before we implemented the accelerated remediation and the GRC toolkit. So you can go to the next slide. So now at CCM, we're viewed as the thought leader for audit at Carlisle companies. We can see all of our SOD issues in real time. They get reviewed before any access changes are approved. We're proactively going in and adding automated mitigating controls. That was one of the items that I didn't really get into earlier, but as part of the tool set as well, you can assign automated reports inside of SAP. You can assign those to your risks and assign mitigating controls to run for those risks on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever time frame you want basis. Those are routed through the system to the person that owns that risk, and you can see right inside the system the audit report that was run. You can see any comments that were made by the owner of that risk in the system, and the auditors can go in and pull out their own mitigating controls data. So all this in the past used to be we would run manual reports. People would print them out. They would sign off on stuff. The problem that you would have is when the auditors came in and asked for samples, we would go to these people's offices and we would ask them for the reports, and a lot of times they would have them, but if a person had changed roles or a person didn't have time to get to it that month, we would have another audit finding because the mitigating control wasn't functioning. So now we're automatically able to monitor all of that. We're automatically able to see who has and who hasn't filled out their mitigating controls. Our auditors go in, access the system at any time, get their own evidence, and we've gone from, at CCM, from being, in the past, we were looked at as an audit issue because there were findings and there were more every year, to now at our company, our parent company looks at us as the go-to division for how to successfully support SOX compliance. And you can go on to the next slide. So overall, this was a very quick implementation for us. Symmetry came on site for a week, worked with us to set up the control panel tools, risk analyzer, the transport manager, workflow, and emergency access tools. We deployed all of those and had them up and running, and had our IT people trained on how to use them during that first week. After that, we were immediately able to start our accelerated remediation project. Once the new security roles were in place, we had very positive feedback from our end users. We did not have a big cry from our users to say, you took this access away or that. They had access to everything they needed. They were very involved in the process, and it was very quick. The end users had the ability to turn on their old access anytime that they needed throughout the transition period through the emergency access manager. The control panel tool logged everything that they did while that old access was active. The tool was very simple and easy to use. We just basically, for our end users, we sent out an email with instructions. It was basically just a couple of very small, easy steps, and the users really did the rest of the work. They would call the emergency access manager tool. They would say what their issue was, and Symmetry would just make the issue go away for us very quickly, usually within 24 hours. Any changes that needed to be made for security would still get routed to IT for approval. And the biggest thing for us was everything was auditable in that tool. So overall, I'd say we were very happy with both the accelerated remediation project and the control panel tools. Our auditors now have audit confidence that we're taking a proactive and professional approach to SAP audits and security, and the auditors are really looking very positively at us now, and again, looking at us as the thought leader at our company for how to successfully manage SOX compliance. Next slide. So here, I'd like to turn it back over to Michael, or if there's any questions that anybody had that I can answer, I'd be happy to answer those as well. All right, Michael.
Well, okay. So every year I do what I call the GRC Value Awards, and it's looking at the different technologies out there that companies are implementing and where organizations receive value. And so, from my perspective, one of the case studies that was submitted was, CCM's use of control panel GRC within their environment. And so I selected from dozens of nomination submissions, control panel GRC with the CCM implementation to receive one of the 2016 GRC Value Awards. From my perspective, control panel GRC's accelerated remediation toolkit has provided the CCM significant cost reductions in the efficiencies we talked about for their internal audit staff and external auditors, the SAP security consultants, and the systems and security administrators of SAP. CCM has been able to achieve these cost reductions in a short time frame while providing an internal control structure that provides them confidence going into their audits that's automated and gives them full visibility. Through this, remediation project, CCM significantly reduced their overall IT access risks. So we get the effectiveness element. So, the previous two bullets I was talking a lot about the efficiency risk, but here we see the effectiveness risks, and be able to automate relating compensating controls, and from an IT audit perspective, become a thought leader within its organization. And to me, that's part of the agility risk, is expanding your view and presence too. CCM is in a better position for completing successful audits, which go right aligns with that agility value. Staying risk-free and compliant in order to support the organization's overall company goals, and with that growth, which again goes to the agility value I've discussed, with an enhanced internal control structure. So next slide, please. So in summary, I'd like to congratulate Control Panel GRC and Carlisle Construction Materials, CCM, for achieving value in the implementation of GRC technology and being able to demonstrate value across those angles of GRC efficiency value, effectiveness value, and agility value. In that context, GRC 2020 recognizes Control Panel GRC and CCM with the 2016 GRC Value Award in the domain of automated and continuous controls. Job well done, guys. So with that, I'll turn this back over to our host today.
Thanks so much, Michael, and this is Scott Gulick. At this time, we'd like to encourage you to submit any questions that you might have. We did have a few questions that came in during the presentation that we'll be reading off for our presenters now, but please use the question and answer section of the GoToWebinar if you do have any questions. So one question here that came in for John is, how involved is Symmetry in the initial remediation efforts to get you clean?
Yeah, so Symmetry was very involved in that. Symmetry did our first analysis and came back very quickly with that tool set. And then once we actually got involved in the remediation, we had some dedicated resources at Symmetry that were working with us as often as we needed their help. But they came in with the information on what transactions were being run. They came in with a questionnaire of how would you group your employees and how would you want to separate out like roles like customer service and shipping, and they walked us through some of their methodology about moving from our old transaction and give everybody access to anything in an area to their new, give people access to what they need to do, the jobs for their role, make it easy to assign those. So they were very active in all of that. And then during the project, as we were making the changes, the further we got into the project, the more active Symmetry became with helping us to understand what changes would help us reduce our risks and what we needed to communicate to our end users and helping us with testing. So I would say they were very involved.
And John, just to follow up on that, what was the change management process like in terms of going live with this new security model where maybe access wasn't exactly the same? What was the impact like from a user perspective?
So from a user perspective, I'll start with the change management side. So when we were starting out with this, we got the worksheets from Symmetry, and anytime that there was a change to that, it was very clearly documented in the section of the worksheet to say what was changing, how it was changed, who was changing it, and why. And then so the change management was very good throughout the process, and we had the worksheets. We had copies of those and versions of those for all of the changes that were made. As far as the end user impact, the overall impact was very minimal. As we were going through and moving from our old security model to our new security model, we brought our end users in to test the new roles. So they did have to come in and I would say work with us over a couple of iterations. I think we did 2 or 3 iterations of testing of over a period of a couple of weeks, where they would come in, we'd have the new roles ready, we'd ask them to do some testing. They would use the automated tools inside of the Symmetry control panel tool set. It would tell them what transactions to test. They would go in, they would try to run a transaction, and then it would report the any security access errors back to Symmetry. Symmetry would take care of those, and then during the next iteration, they would run the rest of their tests until we got those roles very clean. Once we went to go live with the changed roles, there was very little user impact. Again, the biggest change for that was the emergency access tool. So the training was very simple. We basically sent an email, said, here's the transaction that you used to run Emergency Access Manager. Here's what we need you to type in as a description. And then when you hit this button, you get your old access back. And then the next time you try it, your transactions should be working. And so the users were very happy with that. They had very little impacts because we did the testing, we used the automated tool testing up front, and then they had access to their old roles anytime they needed it, and IT could see everything that they were doing, and Symmetry could see everything that they were doing during the time that they had that elevated access. That answer the question, Scott?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, John. Another question that kind of a follow-up to this was asking, and this is probably more for me to address, but is what we did for the CCM implementation part of the software, or is it something extra, an add-on? And so CCM moved forward and purchased the software and then utilized Symmetry as a consulting organization to help them with the security redesign. So that was a separate project to kind of help them get clean in a very quick timeline. After that, what Carlisle found was that their requirements to actually manage that security going forward had gone down quite a bit, and subsequently they've actually out-tasked that security maintenance to the Symmetry team to take care of that for them. So hopefully that addresses some of the questions. There's a couple other specific questions that we will follow up with the individuals on. So I think at this point, acknowledging we're right at just about at the top of the hour, I'm going to turn it back to Sierra.
All right. Thank you, Michael, John, and Scott, for the great presentation today. I also wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join our live webinar. We hope you found value from today's content. Remember, for those attending today, you will receive a full Carlisle case study via your inbox. And we also encourage all of you to reach out with any questions or next steps. Our Control Panel GRC team is more than happy to continue to work with you to get your business case built for an automated control solution. For more information regarding Control Panel's GRC solution suite, please visit www.symmetrycorp.com, and also be sure to stay tuned for future communications and look for a regularly posted GRC blog post. Thanks again, and we look forward to working with you all. Have a great day.